The courtroom lights shimmered against the snow outside, where Christmas wreaths hung untouched on marble columns. Inside, silence cut sharper than any gavel. Billionaire Ethan Callahan, once the face of Silicon Valley power, now sat alone at the defendant's table, his jaw tight, his heart heavier than the empire he built. Across from him, Grace Carter, a black nanny in a modest navy coat, held the trembling hand of Landon, the 20-year-old she'd raised since he was a baby. Reporters whispered, "The Callahan heir raised by a nanny?" Cameras flashed. Ethan looked up, eyes meeting the young man who shared his blood, but not his name. When the judge asked, "Do you acknowledge this man as your father?" Landon's answer cut through the air like winter glass. "No, Your Honor. I already have one. She's right here." The courtroom gasped. Grace's eyes filled, not with pride, but sorrow. She hadn't raised Landon to hate. She'd raised him to heal. But healing had never been part of Ethan's world. Outside, the city glowed with Christmas cheer, carolers singing, snowflakes catching on gold streetlights. While inside, a family stood on the edge of collapse. Ethan clenched his fists. He could buy anything except redemption. And that night, as the snow began to fall over San Francisco, he realized no fortune could save him from the truth waiting in that woman's eyes. 20 years earlier, Christmas lights still glimmered across the Callahan mansion like a magazine cover. Perfect, cold, and staged. Ethan Callahan was 35, newly crowned tech royalty, and the youngest CEO to ever grace the cover of Forbes. His father's legacy pulsed through every boardroom wall. Power was the family language. Emotion was a foreign tongue. That winter, his world collided with Grace Carter, then a 25-year-old jazz singer from Oakland who sang at a charity gala his company sponsored. Her voice was warmth in a room of ice. She wasn't supposed to notice him, and he wasn't supposed to feel anything. But when she laughed, his armor cracked. Their affair lasted months. Late-night drives across the bay, cheap coffee in diners where no one knew his name. Long talks about dreams Ethan had forgotten he once had. Grace wasn't impressed by his cars or his money. She wanted to know who he was when he wasn't Ethan Callahan, CEO. But love doesn't always survive power. When Grace found out she was pregnant, she told him the night before Christmas Eve. She expected silence, maybe panic, but not contempt. "You can't have this baby," he said, pacing the marble floor. "My father will destroy everything. Do you understand what's at stake?" Grace's voice trembled. "What's at stake is a child, Ethan. Our child." He turned away. "Don't call it that. You don't even know if—" "Don't you dare!" she snapped. "Don't you dare finish that sentence." But he did. And the sound of his words cut deeper than any winter wind. By New Year's, she was gone. No note, no lawsuit, no plea, just absence. Ethan told himself it was for the best. He buried himself in work, in women, in the illusion of control. The tabloids celebrated his ruthlessness. Investors worshipped him. Yet every Christmas, when the city lit up, he'd feel a strange emptiness, a soundless echo that reminded him of her song. Grace, meanwhile, struggled in a different world. She gave birth in a small public hospital under flickering fluorescent lights. No visitors, no gifts, no Ethan. She named the baby Landon, a name that meant Long Hill, because life, for them, would be one long climb. With no family to turn to, Grace became a nanny for wealthy families in Oakland, holding other people's children while her own slept in a cot nearby. The irony wasn't lost on her, raising the privileged while scraping by, but she found dignity in the work. She sang lullabies that carried hope through the cracks of poverty. Years passed. She watched Landon learn to walk, to laugh, to play piano on an old church keyboard. Her faith in God, though often bruised, never broke. She told Landon his father was a man who lost his way, and that sometimes people had to wander through darkness before they could see the light. Back in San Francisco, Ethan's empire soared, and his soul withered. His father died, leaving him billions and an empty mansion overlooking the bay. He had every success except peace. Reporters called him the man who built the future. They never knew he had destroyed one, too. It wasn't until years later, when an old Christmas record played on a hotel radio, the same song Grace used to hum, that something inside him cracked open again. For the first time, he felt it. Regret. The kind that crawls into your chest and refuses to leave. He told himself it was too late. But fate, as it often does, was already stitching together the next chapter. One that would bring him face to face with the very woman he broke and the son he never met. 2 decades later, San Francisco glowed under strings of Christmas lights. The Callahan Tower, 40 floors of glass and steel, stood like a monument to success. Inside, Ethan Callahan stared out over the bay, his reflection fractured in the window. His life was measured in quarterly profits, not memories. But lately, even victory felt hollow. He was 55 now, alone in a penthouse built for someone else. No wife, no family, just headlines and ghosts. When the board forced him to take a holiday for mental health reasons, he almost laughed. Men like him didn't rest. They endured. But on December 10th, an article changed everything. The Oakland Chronicle ran a story about a youth mentorship program called Legacy First, founded by a young man named Landon Carter. The accompanying photo made Ethan's heart stop. The same jawline, the same eyes, the same look he used to see in the mirror before ambition replaced innocence. He called his assistant, trembling. "Find out everything about him." Within days, a private investigator confirmed the truth. The boy was his son. And the woman running the mentorship program, his former lover, Grace Carter. For the first time in decades, Ethan felt something other than control. Guilt, fear, longing. Meanwhile, across the bridge in Oakland, Grace's life was quiet, steady. Her days began with coffee, gospel music, and the sound of teenagers laughing in the community hall she ran. Every Christmas, she turned the place into a safe haven for kids who had nowhere to go. Stringing lights, baking cookies, and singing hymns that smelled like cinnamon and forgiveness. Landon, now 20, helped her organize the event that year. He was studying business at Berkeley, charming, grounded, everything she'd prayed he'd become. But sometimes she caught him staring at the families they served, with a longing he didn't admit. He'd grown up loved, but he still wondered about the missing piece. One evening, a black car pulled up outside the center. The door opened, and Ethan stepped out. Time had carved lines in his face, but power still walked beside him like a shadow. The children whispered, "Is that him? The man from the news?" Grace froze when she saw him. 2 decades of silence broken by one familiar voice. "Grace," her breath caught. "You shouldn't be here." "I had to see him," Ethan said quietly. "Our son." Landon appeared in the doorway, confusion in his eyes. "Mom? Who is—" Grace hesitated. "Someone I used to know." Ethan's voice faltered. "Landon, I'm your father." The words hung in the air like frost. The room went silent, except for a Christmas hymn faintly playing in the background. Silent night. Landon stared at him, disbelief etched on his face. "My father? You mean the man who was never there?" Ethan tried to speak, but guilt drowned the words. "I made mistakes. I want to make things right." Grace's eyes softened, but her voice stayed firm. "You don't get to walk in 20 years later and rewrite history, Ethan. He's not a transaction. He's a person." Ethan looked around the center, the kids, the laughter, the warmth he could never buy. "You built this," he whispered. Without me. Grace nodded. Because love doesn't need your permission. That night, as Ethan left, snow began to fall over Oakland for the first time in years. He stood under the streetlight, watching Grace close the door behind her. For the first time in a long time, he felt small, but not hopeless, because somewhere inside that room was a boy who still carried his blood, and maybe, just maybe, a woman who still carried a spark of what they once were. The news broke 3 days before Christmas. Billionaire Ethan Callahan's secret son found in Oakland. Within hours, the story spread like wildfire. Reporters camped outside the youth center. Drones hovered above Grace's roof. Paparazzi stalked Landon's classes at Berkeley. What had once been a quiet, healing life now burned under camera flashes. Grace tried to protect her son the only way she knew how, by standing in front of him. "Don't talk to them," she said softly. "They'll twist your words." Landon nodded, but his eyes flickered with anger. "He did this, didn't he?" Across the bay, Ethan sat in his office, surrounded by lawyers and PR consultants. Damage control, they called it. He called it desperation. The board wanted to spin the reunion into a redemption narrative. "You'll look human again," one executive said. "A father reclaiming his legacy? It's good press." But Ethan wasn't after headlines. He was after forgiveness. Still, old habits die hard. He signed a few papers, gave one interview, and within a day, Grace Carter's name was trending next to his. The comments were cruel. Gold digger. Opportunist. Nanny turned social climber. Grace's phone rang nonstop. Sponsors withdrew from her youth program. Donors canceled events. "We can fix this," Michael Bennett, her friend and lawyer, told her. "But you'll have to fight." "Fight him?" she asked. "For what? Peace?" "For your dignity," Michael replied, "and for Landon's name." That night, Grace went on live television. Not as a victim, but as a mother. "I don't need anyone's fortune," she said calmly. "I've raised my son with integrity, not inheritance." Her poise silenced the hate for a moment, but the damage was done. Ethan watched the broadcast alone. Every word she spoke was a mirror to his shame. When his assistant entered with a message from his lawyer, he barely looked up. "She's filing for a restraining order," the man said. "You'll need to respond." Ethan's heart sank. "She thinks I'm a threat?" "She thinks you're dangerous," the lawyer replied. The next morning, Ethan showed up at Grace's center unannounced. Cameras swarmed. Grace was inside decorating a small Christmas tree with the children when she heard the noise. She stepped outside, eyes blazing. "You need to leave. I just want to talk." "Talk?" She let out a bitter laugh. "You let your people humiliate me on every channel, Ethan. You turned our pain into your headline." "I didn't approve that," he said. "Save it," she cut in. "You've always had someone else to blame." Landon appeared behind her, his expression cold. "You've done enough," he said. Ethan looked at him, searching for the boy he'd imagined, the boy from dreams that never came true. "Landon, I didn't mean for any of this." "You didn't mean to abandon us either," Landon said, his voice trembling. "But you did." The words landed like a gavel. Grace closed the door. The reporters caught every second of it, spinning the moment into another spectacle. Nanny and son slam billionaire. By Christmas Eve, the tension reached its breaking point. Grace's program was on the verge of shutting down. Sponsors cited negative publicity. Landon skipped his finals, torn between rage and guilt. Michael prepared court filings to counter Ethan's sudden move, a petition for paternal acknowledgement and custody rights. "He's suing you?" Michael said, slamming the document on Grace's table. Grace felt her knees weaken. "No, he wouldn't, but he did." Ethan's lawyers had filed the motion that morning, claiming Landon as his biological heir. It wasn't about money, they said. It was about legacy. When Grace confronted Ethan at his penthouse that night, he looked older than she remembered. "You're taking me to court?" she asked quietly. "I'm trying to give him what's his." "What's his?" she whispered. "He already has it. His peace, his home, his mother. You're trying to buy what love already gave." Ethan slammed his glass down. "I missed 20 years. You think that doesn't matter?" "Of course it matters," she said, voice shaking. "But you can't fix it with a lawsuit. You fix it by showing up." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the hum of the city below. Ethan looked out the window, where Christmas lights reflected off the bay. "I don't know how," he admitted. "I never learned how to show up." Grace's anger softened for a heartbeat. "Then learn," she said. "Start with listening." But it was too late. The papers had already been filed. The court date was set for December 24th, Christmas Eve. As snow began to fall over San Francisco for the first time in years, Grace stood outside the courthouse steps, clutching Landon's hand. Across the plaza, Ethan arrived in a navy coat, surrounded by lawyers. Their eyes met across the swirling white air. Two souls divided by 20 years and one signature. It would take more than justice to heal this. It would take a miracle. Christmas Eve dawned gray and bitter. The courthouse steps were dusted in white, the kind of snow San Francisco only saw once in a generation, rare, fleeting, and impossible to ignore. Inside, the air smelled of pine and leather. Even the judge had a small red ribbon pinned to her robe, a reminder that this day was supposed to mean peace. But there was no peace in courtroom 7, only silence and tension. Ethan Callahan sat at one table, surrounded by attorneys in designer suits. Across from him sat Grace Carter and Landon, their hands lightly touching, their strength invisible but solid. Michael Bennett, their lawyer, organized his papers with quiet confidence. When the hearing began, it wasn't about money or blood. It was about belonging. Ethan's attorney spoke first. "Your Honor, Mr. Callahan acknowledges his mistakes, but bloodlines carry obligations. My client simply wishes to be recognized as the father of Mr. Landon Carter, legally, emotionally, and socially." The judge glanced up. "And where was Mr. Callahan for the last 20 years? Ethan shifted uncomfortably. His mouth opened, then closed. The silence said more than any defense. Then came Grace's turn. Michael stood. "Your Honor, my client has never denied the truth of biology. But we stand here today not to contest DNA, but to protect something far greater. Love that was earned, not inherited. Mr. Callahan abandoned this child before he was even born. He cannot now demand rights to the man someone else raised." The room buzzed. Reporters scribbled. Ethan looked at Grace, the weight of his choices written across his face. Then, without prompting, Grace stood. "May I speak?" The judge nodded. Grace's voice was steady but heavy with years of unspoken pain. "When Ethan left, I was 25, scared, and pregnant. I didn't have money, lawyers, or protection. I had faith. I raised Landon with honesty and love, teaching him that his worth isn't tied to a name. I never told him to hate his father. I only told him that people can lose their way." She turned to Ethan, her eyes wet but unwavering. "But you didn't just lose your way. You lost your heart." Ethan's hand clenched around his pen until it cracked. He wanted to speak, to apologize, but every word felt too small. The judge called for recess. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed, but Grace ignored them. Landon leaned against a pillar, staring at the floor. "He thinks he can own me," he murmured. "Like a company." Grace brushed his cheek. "You're not his product. You're your own miracle." Across the hall, Ethan stood alone, staring at the snow swirling beyond the glass doors. His lawyer approached. "You're losing this, Ethan. If we pivot—" "No," Ethan said, his voice low but clear. "We stop here." When the court reconvened, the judge asked if either side had final statements. Ethan rose before his lawyer could stop him. "I don't have a statement," he said quietly. just the truth. The courtroom stilled. I was raised to believe that love was weakness. My father taught me that legacy meant power, that bloodlines mattered more than kindness. When Grace told me she was pregnant, I panicked. Not because I didn't love her, but because I didn't know how. I let fear destroy something pure. I tried to bury the memory of her, but it never left me. Every Christmas, I heard her voice. Every success felt hollow. He turned to Grace and Landon. You don't owe me anything. Not a name, not forgiveness. I filed this case because I thought I could rewrite the past with money and law. I was wrong. I don't want control. I just want the chance to stand here and say, I'm sorry. His voice broke on the last word. For the first time, the billionaire everyone feared looked human, fragile even. Landon's heart pounded. He wanted to hate him, to stay cold. But when he looked into Ethan's eyes, he saw something he didn't expect. Truth. Not perfect, but raw. The judge nodded solemnly. Thank you, Mr. Callahan. We'll render the decision shortly. Before the verdict, Landon asked to speak. He walked to the witness stand, his posture calm but trembling at the edges. When I was a kid, he began, I used to wonder why my friends' fathers came to school concerts, why they had someone cheering in the stands. I told myself I didn't need that I was enough. And I was, because my mom made me enough. He turned toward Ethan. But part of me always wondered if I'd ever matter to you. Not because of blood, because of choice. Today, I realize something. Love isn't about claiming. It's about showing up. You didn't, but she did. He looked at Grace, eyes full of light. And that's why she's my real parent. Grace couldn't hold back tears. The judge's gavel struck gently. This court recognizes Ms. Grace Carter as the sole legal guardian and parent of Landon Carter. Mr. Callahan may, at the son's discretion, pursue future contact, but not custody. The room exhaled. Ethan nodded, his face unreadable. But as he turned to leave, Landon's voice stopped him. Wait! Ethan froze. You said you wanted a chance to make things right. Landon said softly. Maybe that starts with honesty. So, here's mine. I forgive you, but forgiveness isn't an invitation. It's closure. The snow outside thickened, coating the courthouse steps in silver. For a long moment, Ethan couldn't move. Then he whispered, Thank you. As the crowd dispersed, Grace took Landon's hand. Reporters shouted, flashes burst, but all she saw was her son, the boy she'd prayed over, fought for, and finally, freed. Outside, bells from a nearby church began to ring. The city, wrapped in snow and light, felt like it was holding its breath. And somewhere, as Ethan stepped into the cold alone, a single snowflake melted on his palm. Small, pure, fleeting. For the first time in 20 years, he closed his eyes and whispered a prayer. It wasn't for victory, it was for peace. 1 year later, San Francisco shimmered again under the glow of Christmas lights. But this time, the Callahan Tower was dark. The empire Ethan once ruled had been sold to a younger CEO. His name had faded from the business headlines, replaced by newer faces and fresher fortunes. Yet for the first time, Ethan didn't mind. He'd finally learned to live without needing to be seen. He moved into a modest townhouse near Golden Gate Park. No staff, no meetings, no noise. His days began with coffee and silence. Therapy had become his new boardroom, honesty his new investment. Sometimes he volunteered at community centers under a pseudonym, teaching young men about integrity, loss, and second chances. Few ever recognized him. He liked it that way. Meanwhile, in Oakland, Grace Carter's youth center was thriving. The storm of scandal had passed, and donations, anonymous and sincere, arrived from all over the country. Kids who once had nowhere to go now found warmth under twinkling lights and the scent of gingerbread. Grace still sang during Christmas week, her voice softer now, but filled with a peace she had earned through tears. Landon, now 21, had become one of the youngest board members in a regional nonprofit coalition. He balanced his studies with mentoring younger boys, teaching them the same lesson his mother taught him. Love isn't about perfection, it's about showing up. On Christmas Eve, the three of them found themselves woven together again, not by fate, but by grace. It started with a letter, a simple white envelope with no return address. Grace recognized the handwriting instantly. She opened it slowly. Dear Grace, I don't expect forgiveness. I already received more than I deserve. But this year, I wanted to give back in the only way that feels right. You once taught me that miracles aren't loud. They're quiet acts of courage. So here's mine. I've transferred the remaining funds from my company sale to the Legacy First Foundation in Landon's name. No press, no signatures, no Callahan branding. Just gratitude. Thank you for raising him to be better than me. Merry Christmas, Ethan. Grace folded the letter and smiled faintly. She didn't cry this time. Some wounds didn't need tears anymore. They needed silence. Later that evening, she and Landon stood before the Christmas tree in the youth center. Kids were singing carols. The room smelled of cocoa and pine, and laughter bounced off the walls. Landon placed a golden ornament near the top, a small dove, for peace, he said quietly. Grace nodded. For peace. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft, slow, almost sacred. A few miles away, Ethan walked through Golden Gate Park, the city hushed under white. Families passed with laughter and music. He stopped near the pond, where a small church choir was performing beneath the streetlights. The hymn was Silent Night. He stood there for a long time, hands in his coat pockets, listening. When the final note faded, he whispered, "Thank you," though no one was near enough to hear. At that moment, across the city, the lights in Grace's center flickered, once, twice, then glowed brighter. The children gasped. Landon looked up through the window, smiling faintly. "Mom, did you see that?" She did, and though she said nothing, she felt it, a warmth spreading through her chest like an answered prayer. It wasn't magic in the worldly sense. It was the miracle she had been promised all along. Healing. Later that night, as she closed the doors and turned off the lights, a knock echoed softly. When she opened them, no one stood there. Only the snow, falling gently, and a single white rose resting on the step. Tucked beneath it was a note written in that same familiar hand. Peace begins where pride ends. Grace smiled, placed the rose in a glass of water, and whispered into the night, "Merry Christmas, Ethan." Across town, Ethan sat by his small fireplace, holding the twin of that rose in his hand. Outside, the city bells rang midnight. He closed his eyes, feeling, for the first time in his life, completely still. Some stories didn't need grand endings. They just needed truth. And in that truth, under the quiet snow of a forgiving Christmas, 3 souls, 1 man, 1 woman, 1 son, finally shared the same light. The kind that doesn't fade when the season ends. The kind that stays.